Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we dig in deep to analyze the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, 1 minute at a time. I'm Andy Nelson from thenextreel.com. And of course, we are back talking about Jon Favreau's 2008 film Iron Man. And with me this week is Kyle Olson from Legible Scrawl. We've had a number of the Legible Scrawl folks on, but finally, we get you.
Yes, you had a lot of my friends on. I've been listening to. I'm so happy that they could come along because one thing we love doing is talking about Marvel movies.
Yeah, you are kind of the mastermind behind the whole thing. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. Yeah, it was one of those things where I looked around at my friends and realized that this untapped well of talent, that they all had all these things and they weren't doing anything with them. And so I just started asking people if they would do things. So I found like, you have a great voice. Would you be my announcer? You are a great actor. Would you come on and do this stuff? And you know all these things. And I sort of started putting together all these little projects, finding people to do it. The reason that I'm here is because my group, Legible Scrawl, did a podcast called the Road to Infinity podcast. So in that, we decided to do a weekly podcast leading up to Infinity War, where we'd watch one Marvel movie and talk about it at length and pretty much in exhausting detail for about 2 hours or so. Kind of the opposite of what you guys are doing.
We're doing exhausting detail, but we're stretching it out for a really long time.
Exactly. So when you guys contacted and said, "Hey, we're doing this Marvel thing. Would you be interested in coming along?" And I said, "Of course, that would be fantastic." Because obviously, one thing I like to do is talk about all the Marvel things.
That's right. We are actually here to talk about Iron Man. We're looking at minute 61. On today's show, the minute starts with Tony gearing up for a second test flight, and it ends with Tony finishing said flight. This is a very compact flight. Like, you don't realize it until you're watching it.
That's true. Yeah, when you see it all together, that it comes out to about five minutes total from his first pickup to his abrupt landing, which might or might not happen in a couple minutes, as we can't talk about the future of the movie. But yeah, when you contacted and said, "Hey, what do you want to talk about Iron Man?" I said, "I know the exact scene I want to talk about because this is one of my favorite parts of the movie. The movie is fantastic, but one of my favorite things in any young superheroes starting out, I mean, young in terms of their career, not in terms of their age, because obviously one of the cool things about Iron Man is that he's a man, not a kid, is the discovering their powers montage. And this is basically the Iron Man version of that. Yeah, it's like, this is in Sam Raimi's movie, this is Peter Parker on the rooftop, trying to figure out how his webs work. And so this is that same kind of thing. I love that because this is always where it's taking the audience from, this guy, you've been with this guy. I say guy just because let's face it, 99% of it so far is that way. Come on, Captain Marvel, you can do it. But it starts out as this is a regular person, then something happens, and then this is the point where they transition from the regular to there. And so this is where we sort of also then project on ourselves of what it'd be like to actually swing as Spider-Man, to fly as Iron Man, to with Captain America, it's having to chase the saboteur down the street. So suddenly he was this pipsqueak of a guy, and all of a sudden he can leap over cars, he can rip doors off of taxis, and so with Iron Man, it's a cool thing to see him building this thing around himself and then testing it out, of course, on himself, because how much more Tony Stark could you be?
Exactly. In his own garage.
Yeah,
we were talking about it in an earlier minute where it's like, a teenager, experimenting with his toys in the basement.
That's right.
Where his parents can't find him.
Yeah, exactly. And also and his garage too, because how much more fitting could that be? Because you've got Steve Jobs, you've got Bill Gates, you've got all these guys who invented things in their garage. So of course Tony would be working in his garage to come up with the next big invention.
Yeah, we thought it was kind of funny because it's like this. I mean, this is a guy, like, he doesn't need to be in his garage. He is already a Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk. Yet here he is. He's in his garage doing this flight test where, I mean, we've already seen him have accidents. He flipped over and slammed into the wall. He could very easily do the same thing and crash through a window and fall off the cliff. It just seems like this probably isn't the best place to do it. But for whatever reason, he chooses to do it here instead of some secret lab in one of his many Stark buildings.
Right. So, we've seen Stark International. Like, we know that there's a giant arc reactor there that can give him all the power he wants. But instead, like you say, he's hiding in his garage doing something incredibly world changing.
It's so interesting, and I think it just says a lot about the character.
Yeah. So, have you guys talked about repulsor technology?
We've talked a little bit about repulsor technology.
Okay.
Yeah, we haven't gotten into it too much, but I mean, obviously it was the thing that he kind of came up with here in the cave with his arc reactor.
Well,
and started
not exactly
it
though,
there.
because it was actually his dad that invented it. Because if you go to Captain America, like you can see he's already built it on the flying car that he shows off at the World's Fair. So this is like Tony is taking his technology and then now has a power source and that he can use to make it small and compact. But yeah, I was going on about it, and boy, if you want to go down an internet rabbit hole, go on some of the message boards and hear the people trying to figure out what exactly is how the repulsor tech works, because wow, it very quickly went beyond any of my limited science understandings. It got to about muons, and then I was like, I'm lost. But
it's very fun to jump onto science tech pages where they're talking about the science within the film and how it would work. We were looking at it when he was talking about like the number of megajoules that the arc reactor in his chest would generate, and just the conversations that the scientists would have about it and the logic and everything. It was very fun to read, but like you said, it's very heady stuff. Yeah. I was like, they're using so many big words. I just don't know what they're talking about right now.
Yeah, I'm a comic book fan from back in the day. So I started out as I got so much talking about myself that we didn't even do the traditional like, where did you come into comics thing? So I'm a fan of the show. That's
fine. So. Yeah, let us know. Okay, where did you? Well, tell us now that you brought it up.
I brought it up. That's enough about me. Let's talk about me. No, so I started reading comics early when I was a kid, but it was all scattershot and random because I would when we would go on these long road trips, my mom would buy me these collections of comics, and it was all just random Marvel and DC comics in bags. So I read all that stuff, but I had no idea of a concept of a Marvel universe versus a DC universe versus Valiant or any of that stuff. It was all just jumbled together. It wasn't until sort of the comics boom in the 90s that I really got into it and then understood like where each thing fit and then started reading religiously. But by the time that I got to that point, Iron Man was kind of on the wane because he had his sort of heyday. And then I would say sort of in the late 80s, he had Armor Wars and there was some really good stuff. But by the time I was reading it, I believe his comic was actually canceled. Like he was just sort of a periphery character in Avengers comics. And it got so bad that they actually made him a villain at one point. Have you talked at all about Teen Tony?
No, we haven't.
Oh man,
we haven't dug too deep into
the comic lore,
anything with Iron Man other than kind of what we've seen here. But do tell, because it sounds interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we have a lot of minutes to get through, so I won't make this into the Iron Man comic bashing podcast. But there at one point, Iron Man the character had got so broken, and I apologize to comic book purists there. I'm going to go. Just graze lightly over this that you can do a whole podcast just on this kind of stuff. But he'd gotten so broken that they decided that he was a villain now. Like he had being mind controlled. So all of a sudden Iron Man became a bad guy. And it got so far down the line of him making him a bad guy, they couldn't figure out how to sort of pull out of the dive. So instead the Avengers traveled back in time and pulled teenage Tony Stark, which they refer to as Anthony Stark, forward to try and talk to his future self, to talk him down. But then in the process of the fighting, our Tony Stark that we've been reading all this time died, and they replaced him with young Tony Stark. So for a while there, it was the teenage version of Tony Stark was running around with the Avengers and things. It was very, very strange.
Yeah, and that's what happens in the world of comic books.
True,
like because with all these universes and everything, and time travel and stuff. I mean, sometimes they go down crazy rabbit holes.
Yeah, and the ultimate arbiter of that, the monthly deadline. Like we need something. We has to do something this month. I even tried to. I was refreshing my memory. Like, how did that end? And the truth is, it never really ended. They just sort of glanced over and sort of tap danced a little bit. Like there was a whole Heroes Reborn universe where they went into an alternate pocket dimension, and then a couple year later they came out of it, and then everything was fine, and they just didn't talk about Teen Tony anymore. Yeah, so it's always fun when you dig into the lore of Marvel because there's so many strange things they've done over the years.
That's really true. Yeah. I mean, you can pick any particular superhero and just kind of dig through their lore, and you'll find some crazy stories that you've probably never heard of because a lot of those, maybe for good reason, kind of fade by the wayside.
Yeah. When we do the Captain America by minute podcast, you can bring me back on to talk about werewolf Captain America. The Cap Wolf.
That's so funny. The Cap Wolf.
The Cap Wolf. So
I'm looking at Teen Tony right now. First appeared in Iron Man number 325 in February 96. Yep.
Yeah, it was an interesting time in Marvel Comics. So I did in digging through this stuff. I wanted to see if I could find anything. They never did an official audio commentary for Iron Man,
right?
But they did do a sort of loose commentary at the American Cinematheque. And they record it, and there's sort of a terrible recording of that. But is
there a recording of it?
There's a recording.
Because I had a buddy who was actually there, and I just found this out. I didn't know he was there, but he got tickets to it, and he thought it was just a screening of Iron Man.
And then surprise,
Jon Favreau was there, and then hey, we can't do this without Robert Downey Jr.
and all of a sudden he's just like, oh
my god, right? And he said it was like a live riff tracks thing with the two of them in this conversson. He said it was amazing.
Yeah, I managed to track down a recording of it. So I will shoot that your way so you can. Even though you're halfway through, from here on out, you can do it. It sounds like somebody basically just took their phone and pressed record. So it's the person who's there is laughing very loudly over it. So, but you can still hear because it's pretty much booming through there. So I played sort of this section of it to try and find out what it was, and there's some interesting stuff that we'll talk about over the next couple of episodes because it's like they get caught up in the movie sometimes too and are just purely watching it. Sure. But one of the things that they talked about, and also I sort of loosely corroborated from a reporter from Ain't It Cool News, is that when Tony's actually flying, like his first time, because in this minute we have him just sort of learning how to get above the ground without slamming himself into the wall like he did earlier on.
Right.
Only one of those arms is actually real. He only had the right arm. Because they originally were going to have the boots and one arm, and then right before filming, they're like, no, we need to do both. He got to have both so he can balance himself. And so they just CG'd the left arm onto him.
Interesting.
So it's when he's doing that, like he's acting like he has two of the things on, but only one of those really ILM actually put on the other. Piece onto it digitally through all this stuff, and I'm guessing right and left because I looked at it very closely after I learned that, and I believe it is the right arm is what he actually is using a lot because it gets a lot of close-ups, and the left one less so. But also he's right-handed.
Interesting. Yeah, those are the flight stabilizers that he was working on that he realized he needed to add on to his outfit once he tried boots only, and that's when he slammed into the wall behind him.
Yeah, that's a great sight gag.
Very funny. Yeah, absolutely. And this one's fun too. I mean, this is his second test flight. The first one that we saw in the last minute, he made it. He made a successful, very short flight, but he did a 1%. And just kind of went up, and then he came down, and it worked just fine. This time he's at 2.5%, and it is a magnificent dance around his workshop, floating over the cars, knocking all the papers everywhere, almost running into the camera that Yu is holding, and making some fantastic grunts and grimaces. And this is just like Robert Downey Jr. at his finest, right?
He really has some great sounds as he's being, because you also know he's in a harness, he's being lifted around the room, and he has to look like he's in control.
Right.
As much as like you were in some of the previous episode, you're talking about how great Jeff Bridges in this and Terrence Howard. I mean, when Robert is with them, like the energy is very different and stuff too. But here he's alone, and he is acting against a metal arm, and he's still amazing. This is where Robert Downey Jr. really shines because he's, obviously there's a whole crew there, but he is essentially alone, and he's acting opposite. Maybe there's a technician off to the side with a remote control, but he's operating to DUM-E. That's the and then I believe at this point DUM-E is the one who's holding the fire extinguisher, and Yu is the one who's holding the camera. Those are just two robots. But he is acting with and having a conversation with this metal arm, and and through him you are also giving this thing life. DUM-E becomes one of the best characters in the movie.
Oh, it's so funny. Well, and this is a great moment, and more than any other point in the film, this is where it feels like a sad version of the Pixar lamp to me. Like it's just like he kind of hangs his little puppy dog head down, and you get the woo little sound with it and everything. It's done so well, and they're clearly having fun with it.
Oh yeah, I even looked around to see if I could figure out who the puppeteer was, and I couldn't find it. I decided that there was a guy with a great name in ILM, a visual effects guy named Matt Heimlich. So I decided Matt Heimlich, he's the guy.
He must be the guy.
He must be the guy. He's in the credits. I was like, with a name like that, he's got to have been the one.
Right. That's funny, Matt. You can let us know for sure if you're listening.
Contact us. He's got a pretty good career. I looked at his stuff too. I mean, he's doing well for himself.
Well, when you're jumping onto movies like Iron Man, you can find some pretty strong filmographies in some of these people. It's pretty interesting. As I watch this, it's funny because the repulsor technology, which you brought up earlier, every time he's using it after this, I never see it spark, and it only ever seems to like actually shoot sparks when he's doing the testing right now. And I doubt that there's any sparks coming out of his hands and feet as they're doing this test. In fact, I'm pretty sure because I know I watched the behind the scenes footage earlier, and as he's in this rig, kind of they're floating him around the room.
Yeah, this Peter Pan rig, as they have him flying.
Right. It's fantastic, but it's there's so many sparks, and it is such an interesting design element for this early stage as he's testing it. And I think that it was really added to just show, still in the works. I think because it really, as you see these sparks shooting out of his hands and feet, it just feels like something's still not quite right.
Yeah,
with all of this.
He's still getting things nice and precise, and it won't be when we see later he can do precision stuff. At this point, we're still and looking at the rules, what I was interested in is if they talked about it in the way that they talk about Cyclops' eye beams from the X-Men, in that they're not lasers, they don't produce heat. I was curious to see if they had talked about repulsors, because he flies over the cars and the cars are undamaged.
Yeah, and I was watching that too, because you do get that kind of POV as he's going over the cars, and you see the sparks kind of coming down and hitting the cars, but in no way does it look like it's damaging. And even when you see them later, nothing looks damaged.
No.
It's not until later in our week will we actually see some actual car damage from him. But right here, and I do recall seeing something that the repulsor technology does not generate heat.
Yeah.
But again, I think it was scientists theorizing that, because they said if it was, then he would be cooked right away.
That's right, because the amount of power that would come out and the heat that would be coming out would take his hands and feet off. It looks like it's sort of that concussive force, like it is sort of like a force, but then he can change it if he wants to. Later on, he'll have lasers and stuff too that are much more traditional in terms of like cutting through things. In future movies, I'm thinking more like in like Avengers, where he actually is welding.
Yeah, right.
But in here, like everything, it seems to be like it's just basically just a giant push. Like he's pushing it to blow down walls or to knock people over. It's not so much of a ray.
Yeah, and it's very different. It works much better in context of the films nowadays, as opposed to the comics when he was first created. It was much more like transistor technology, which is probably much more relevant to the time. It was a word people saw more often back in the 60s.
Yeah.
Nowadays you see transistor and you're like, oh, that's like something my grandpa would buy at Radio Shack.
Yeah.
So it's funny.
This is once again the genius of Stan Lee, who can just write something like Captain America is hit with Vita rays, and you go, what's that? That doesn't matter. Or like he invents repulsor technology. What does it do? It does whatever I want it to do. Like he was a brilliant man.
I did think there's this one shot early in this minute after he takes off and he's kind of floating around, getting used to the movement and everything. We get after we're done watching we cut to a shot of his boots, and we see his left boot. It kind of like has a couple little air blasts come off of some I don't know, little tubing or something. It's right around like 17 seconds or so, and I find it, I don't know, I'm always curious when I'm seeing these things in action, because I'm like, wonder what that's doing. And what instantly came to my mind is, okay, that's doing its thing when we're just looking at the internal parts, but is that supposed to be like, is it an exhaust or something? Because once it's covered up with all of the actual armor plating and everything, how is that getting out? And it's just one of those things I'm like, it looks really cool, but I
Mhm.
wonder how it works once it's internalized.
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe it's the idea was that it's some kind of like stabilizer on the foot to keep it sort of moving left to right, so it wouldn't sort of like all of a sudden they both go out sideways and suddenly you've you got a whole different
Yeah.
problem. But yeah, because
Yeah.
we'll see that there's lots of different moving parts on here. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
interesting.
it's interesting. Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm like, they're clearly just putting it on there because it looks super cool.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
None of this.
Yeah.
None of this. It's all make up technology.
Like we've seen different sides of Tony. We've seen the playboy. We've seen now. This is obviously after the cave, so we've seen sort of the post traumatic stuff that he's had to deal with. But like this is one of my favorite aspects of him is it has the maker. Like him, like actually
Yes.
getting his hands dirty. Like we've seen him pulling the car apart and stuff too. So we know that he is a guy that works with his hands and likes to to actually build kind of things. But this is what makes him different from a lot of other heroes too, and that we actually get to see him trying, like as opposed to it's sort of in every Batman movie it just goes and now he's in the outfit and off he goes, and we don't get the. Batman Begins did a good job of this. I know that I'm jumping universes here, but to actually see,
whoa.
yeah,
No DC zone.
Let's stick to the MCU here. But that's what makes him different than a lot of the other Marvel characters. Is that like he's the guy that's in there with the wrench and like and the grease stain across his face, trying to get this done, or whatever the Marvel Universe equivalent of grease would be, that they use in the Iron Man suit.
Repulsor grease.
Yeah, repulsor.
Yeah, no, it is really interesting, and that is one of the things that is really exciting about Tony. Like you said, getting to see him be this tinkerer.
Mm-hmm.
We know he's this scientific genius. He's this playboy. He's kind of arrogant. He's cocky. He's got the swagger and all that sort of stuff. But he also is a guy who plays around with these tools in his garage and makes things. And here we see him making some really cool stuff after, a couple weeks or whatever. He's coming up with some amazing things, amazing new toys that he's been developing. Now, at this point, it's like, what is he? I mean, we know that he's discovered all of this while he was in the cave and he used it to escape. But I mean, and I don't know if I've ever really thought about this, but what's really spurring him on to do it right now, other than just being able to do it? He hasn't had that call to action yet.
That's true. At this point, it does seem that he is just kind of playing around. Like he doesn't seem to have a real goal for why he needs the suit. He's not doing it to fight. He's not planning to fly back to Afghanistan. Like he is just had this idea, and now he's sort of just following the idea, which just seems like a very Tony Stark thing to do. Like they talked a lot about Elon Musk too. Elon Musk is a guy who's with a relentless imagination, who just like now I'm doing this, now I'm doing that, and he's going to do the same thing here. It's just he wants to improve on the thing he built.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he wants to improve on it. He wants to, he knows he came up with something really cool at the cave.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it helped him escape and survive. Yeah. But now he's in this place where he's just like, that was cool. What can I do with that?
Yeah.
And I mean, he's talked about it a little bit. He talked about, to Rhodey when he went over to talk to him at the base, and he said, "I'm onto something big. I want you to be a part of it." Mm-hmm. And even Obi came over earlier, and
he wouldn't tell him.
He's just like, "I'm doing something." He wouldn't tell him.
Yeah.
So he's being very coy about it. But I feel like, I don't know. It seems like, is he thinking that he's going to come up with something that like he can sell? Like, I mean, he's not. I don't think he's planning on militarizing it. Because he's had such a reaction to it.
Right.
But it does make me wonder, like, is this the next big thing that he's just going to make to sell? It's like personal transportation devices so people could fly around.
But because obviously, like you say, at this point, there's no way that he's thinking about putting soldiers in these.
Yeah, no, absolutely not.
So it's like he's like, I'll build it, then I'll figure out what to do with it.
Right. Well, and that seems like how Tony operates. Like most of the time, like he gets the bug and he's just like, "Oh, I can figure. What am I doing?" Like he's playing around with something and he wants to solve the mystery, and only later does he actually go, "How can I use this?"
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, very interesting guy.
Mm-hmm.
There is I think possibly my favorite shot in this fantastic scene is as he's flying over. He's gone over his cars. He's cutting through his office, or his work area, knocking all the papers up. And then you cut to this shot that's like down at the end, and you're watching him come toward you, and he tries to stop, and he gets a fantastically funny look on his face, but he holds his hands up like right at the camera and like blasts into the camera lens. I think that is such a cool look, and I just love the way that they came up with that to kind of get a sense of him learning how to stop and brake and turn around.
Yeah, you can see a little bit of surfing in that point where he has his hands out. It's amazing. Like we talked a little about Jon Favreau, like that Jon Favreau as a director was not really known for his visuals. Like, I don't say that to be insulting, but like in the movies he'd gone to, I mean, Zathura was a big step forward, but like he was not really known as it's like a Ridley Scott kind of thing where you have like these big kind of, sweeping shots or any kind of thing. And he really, really upped his game for Iron Man. Like he really, really showed another level of skill that we didn't know he had.
Yeah, and I still would argue that I think that his skill, I think he does a great job here. I think he has a lot a clearly. He builds a great team. I mean, Matthew Libatique as his cinematographer is a great team.
One of the best skills he had is he can spot talent. Like he put together an amazing team for this.
Yeah, and that to me is the thing that really stands out, because that's, I think, largely what helped the whole MCU kind of be born.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah, and this sort of loose, fun style that's not grim and gritty.
We haven't pointed it out yet, but just one last little note: as he's flying around, you do notice down at the end of his space here, he's got that Texaco motor oil sign, and it's just, again, just like the lovely production design in here, just adding all those wonderful touches that give you that real sense of this grease monkey guy and kind of the roots he came from, working on cars with his dad when he was a kid and everything. It's cool.
Yeah, is the idea that the windows behind there are looking out, like that they're actually like shaded windows, but that's sunlight?
Yeah. In fact, as he's coming around the cars, you can actually see a tree out there.
Oh, okay. So I hadn't really thought of that. I always thought of them as just like a bay of lights, but now as you look deep into the frame, you realize, oh no, that's actually like to the outside world, probably looking out over the ocean.
And that's what I'm thinking. That's why I was like, it seems like a really bad idea to do his tests here with these windows, because if he did that backflip and he was facing the other direction, he would have crashed through the window off the cliff into the ocean.
Yes.
But, who knows? Maybe, there's a tree there. Maybe it's not overlooking the cliff. I never really get a good sense of where this bank of windows looks. It's hard to line up this from the inside when I look at the exterior.
Yeah, I know. You see, I wonder if anybody ever put out a blueprints of what is. I think in one of the Lego Marvel games, I think you actually could go to his house and you can actually go into it and run around inside it. So maybe you'll have to go and do that just to get an idea of what the geography of his Cape Doom manor is.
The Art of Iron Man book actually has some pretty good depictions of the different rooms, but I don't think they have a blueprint. I think there's a blueprint of his workshop that kind of gives you a layout of what's down here, but I don't think there's actually a layout of his house. And I feel like I might have seen one online. I'll have to poke around again, see if I can track it down.
Okay.
Well, I don't have anything else for this minute. What about you?
No, I think we've pretty much covered that, because there's a lot of exciting stuff coming, so...
Yes, there is. Would you like to tell everybody where they can find you, Kyle?
Absolutely. My predominant role right now is as a writer. So I have a podcast called The Monday Matinee. It's a fiction anthology podcast. And I write and direct all the episodes. At this point, I'm expanding out this way. I think we're going to have some new writers coming on this season. But I run it sort of like the BBC. So the idea is, instead of doing it Twilight Zone style, where you come in, it's one story and out you go. I sort of run for a couple episodes. So I get an idea and I'm like, let's stay in this world for a while. So I'll do 3 or 4 episodes in this sort of little pocket universe I build, and then move on. If it's good enough or if it's popular enough, then we can come back to it, and revisit it for a later season. Our signature show is called the Swashbuckling Ladies Debate Society. Thank you. The elevator pitch is that it's a married lesbian couple in steampunk France fighting enemies. So it's very swashing and buckling and sword fighting and debating and all sorts of fun stuff, and very anachronistic. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. We've done 2 seasons of that, and there'll be a 3rd season of that coming out pretty soon. I'm about to start writing that soon. So hopefully by the time this is up there, you'll be able to find it. But in the meantime, you can go back and look through our backlog. So look for it in any podcatcher. Look for Monday Matinee. You'll find us.
Awesome. Well, Everybody, that is it for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to the show for free at marvelmovieminute.com. Join us over in our Discord chat room and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Next Reel. And if you like what we do and you want to support us and get some cool stuff, become a patron over at patreon.com/thenextreel. Until next time, true believers.